Peace. It's great to see you again. Today we're going to be talking about a very mysterious person. He was so mysterious that no one ever seen his birth certificate. No one knows when or where or even if he died, and he had more aliases than the Wu-Tang Clan. He went by names like W.F. Muhammad, W.D. Muhammad, W.F. Farad, Wallace Farad, and W.D. Farad. Some called him Mahdi, some called him God in the person, others referred to him as the Savior, and some called him a prophet. Well, let me just get right into it and tell you how all of this came about. Back in the 1800s, there was a man named Alfonso who lived in the East. Alfonso came from a very wealthy and educated family, and he had a bunch of brothers. One of his brothers was always getting into something. As a matter of fact, they oftentimes referred to that brother as Shabazz. They saw Shabazz as a descendant of a relative 50,000 years ago. Legend has it that Shabazz is the one who actually explored Africa and mastered all of the jungles and the landscape. Anyway, Alfonso's brother got caught up in a situation where he was stranded in the West for a very long time. Shabazz and his family were there for so long that they didn't even know about their relatives in the East. Alfonso tried to get over to the West to help him, but he couldn't make it. So he came up with a brilliant idea: to have a child, to teach that child all about his ancestors, and to instruct him to get to the West to find his uncle. So Alfonso looked around, but eventually marched all the way to the Caucasus Mountains to find him a bride. Yeah, that's where the word Caucasian comes from, Caucasus. So when Alfonso arrived in the Caucasus Mountains, it didn't take long for him to find his wife, his bae, his soulmate, Baby G, a righteous Caucasian woman. Now, before we go any further, let me just talk about this right here, because I know some of you are sitting here thinking, with all of those beautiful women of color, Alfonso's going to go all the way to the Caucasus Mountains and find him a snowflake? Well, let me just explain it for you. In 1789, the U.S. Constitution gave Congress absolute authority over immigration law. So by the 1800s, Congress began to limit the amount of immigrants that were allowed to come into the country. Most of those limitations were specifically for people who came from the East. So most people who looked like Alfonso, who came from Asia or Africa, were restricted from coming into the United States. Alfonso knew that if he had a child with a Caucasian woman, that it was a good possibility that that child's complexion would allow them to pass through the immigration restrictions on black and brown people. The first child they had was a little girl, but she was darker skinned. The second child they had was a little boy who was fair-skinned. That child's name was W.D. Farad. Although no one has seen his birth certificate, legend has it that Farad was born on February 26, 1877 in the East. Some argue that his birthplace was Mecca in Arabia. Other people say that it was in India. Some even say it was in New Zealand. One thing that we can all agree on is that he wasn't born in the tropical paradise of Bora Bora. Because of his family's wealth and resources, Farad got the best of what education could offer, starting with being instructed by his own uncles. His father even paid for private lessons to study subjects that you couldn't even get in school. As legend has it, his whole life revolved around education. And there's no stories of Farad having a girlfriend or playing sports. He was somewhat of a golden child to his family, because even his uncles saw him as the best of what all of them had to offer. As a grown man, he was well prepared for his mission to reach his uncle and his family members here in the West. So before Farad revealed himself in America, at the age of 53 on July 4th, 1930, he tested those immigration waters by coming in and out of the country. When Farad finally decided to connect with his people, he settled in Detroit, Michigan, more specifically, an area known as Black Bottom or Paradise Valley. He posed as a door-to-door silk salesman, Now keep in mind that this is 1930 in the midst of the Great Depression, so a lot of people didn't have money to buy silk. They didn't even have enough money to buy food in many cases. But he used this as a means to attract. And when he would talk to community members, he would share these amazing stories about their ancestors in the East. Eventually, Farad became quite popular to people in Paradise Valley, and some began to invite him into their homes for dinner. It was during this time that he would expand on those amazing stories of their ancestors in the East. And regardless of what his dietary restrictions were, he would eat whatever they served. With that growing popularity, Farad began to coordinate meetings in homes and in commercial spaces so that people could learn more. Some of those people were already exposed to similar ideas through leaders such as Marcus Garvey, Noble Drew Ali, and others who came before Farad revealed himself in 1930. There were many people that Farad taught during that time, but one person I wanted to talk about in particular, his name was Elijah Poole, more respectfully known as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. When these two got together, they hung out for about 3.5 years and nearly saw each other every single day. That relationship gave birth to a very comprehensive manual known as the Supreme Wisdom Lessons, a book that was completed on February 20th, 1934. This book contained the teachings of W.D. Farad and was the basis of what came to be known as the Nation of Islam. If you weren't a member of the Nation of Islam, then you would never have access to this book. As Supreme Wisdom, it contained actual facts about the planet's geography, lessons in history, and various different sciences of life that you wouldn't find in a college curriculum. In addition to the original rules of instruction and the problem book, which taught mathematical equations to explain the condition of our people in the West, this book contained 120 lessons that members were encouraged to learn by heart. Following the completion of the Supreme Wisdom book in 1934, Farad just simply disappeared. And to this day, no one can tell you with a surety where he went or even what happened to him. His life was already mysterious, but it was at this point that things really began to get strange. After Farad's disappearance, Elijah Muhammad stepped up as the leader of what came to be known as the Nation of Islam, and the Supreme Wisdom Lessons became the basis of its teachings, which was far different than traditional Islam. In addition, Elijah Muhammad began to teach his followers things that he said Farad taught him personally, many things that were not within the Supreme Wisdom Lessons. Elijah Muhammad began to teach his followers that Farad taught him about civilizations on different planets in our solar system, including Mars, where giants once lived. Elijah Muhammad taught that Farad spoke 16 different languages, including the languages of the birds, that he learned while studying the birds in Africa. Elijah Muhammad also began to teach about the mother wheel, a giant UFO a half mile by a half mile in size, which contained 1,500 smaller planes responsible for raising mountains on the planet Earth. This mother wheel was said to be constructed by scientists on the island of Nippon, aka Japan, in 1929 at the cost of $15 billion in gold. He also taught that the mother wheel and the weather would be used by Farad to destroy this present-day society and to bring about the hereafter as heaven on earth. Frustrated with his leadership and strange teachings that some of his followers had never heard or read before from Farad, Elijah Muhammad was ran out of town. Elijah Muhammad would be on the run for some time until he reestablished himself and the nation in Chicago. In order to establish the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad had to deal with a lot of the backlash and propaganda surrounding the mystery of Farad. Where was he born? How did he grow up? Who was his parents? Where did he go? No one had evidence of these answers, including Elijah Muhammad. But what he did have is the supreme wisdom lessons that were the basis of what he taught. Some of the propaganda got so bad that Farad was called a white man, and Elijah Muhammad's cult considered this Turkish ex-agent of the Nazis their god. Regardless of all of that, the teachings within the supreme wisdom lessons have been instrumental in producing some of the greatest contributors to our journey here in the West. All of these people were once members of the Nation of Islam, and there are far greater numbers of people who were directly influenced by these teachings that were never a part of the nation. All of this would forever change on February 25th, 1975, with the so-called death of Elijah Muhammad. This was devastating to the Nation of Islam, and many members of the Nation of Islam simply lost their way. Elijah Muhammad was seen as a messenger, a prophet, and how can a man of this stature be truly gone? Different factions begin to develop, and individuals amongst the ranks begin to rise up and claim leadership of the nation. In closing, W.D. Farad was a man. He was a human being. He didn't come to the West for us to worship him, to put him on a pedestal, or for us to pray in his name. He came to find his long-lost uncle and his relatives in order to connect us with our family in the East. He came to teach us who we were. It wasn't all about him. And maybe that's one of the reasons that he simply disappeared. Who knows? We are thankful for Elijah Muhammad because he established one of the most successful organizations for us here in the West. His influence is peerless, and the sacrifices that he and his earlier followers made to our growth and development is unparalleled. While there are some branches of the Nation of Islam that are guided by leaders who have stayed consistently true to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and Farad, there are other branches of the Nation of Islam who have departed from those teachings. As a scientist of life, I encourage you to do your own research and think for yourself. We already have enough followers out here, and we need many more leaders. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow at all. It just simply means that you should follow to the extent of learning to lead and think for yourself. Don't be misled, don't be mystified, and preserve the best part for yourself. Peace. Peace. So today I wanted to do a general overview / tutorial about the culture of the 5%. In particular, I wanted to go over what 120 lessons are and how they function. A lot of times you have people who you may come in contact with or that you may hear online who talk about the lessons, our degrees, 120. I wanted to give you some clarity on what that is. One of the other things that I wanted to do is give you a sense of how our culture functions so that you can delineate between people who are authentically considered members of the 5% in a very formal way, as opposed to people who are kind of informally familiar with some of our principles and values, but they're not the 5% in that formal way, as well as people who are just simply outside sympathizers, because it could get very confusing, especially nowadays where you have people who are on social media that have very weird or unique sounding names, or they may strive to use some of our language, and you may not really know for sure who they are. And that can be dangerous in a sense too, because if this is a person that is not really committed to the culture and they have this kind of
pack rat approach or this hodgepodge idea towards elements of culture, you may see them doing things that are not things that we advocate, that are the complete antithesis of what a 5%er actually is. And sometimes you see it in the hip hop industry. So these are some of the things that was going through my mind before I wanted to share this video. So what you see before you, I'm going to go off screen for a second so that I can blow this up so you can have a larger perspective of it. What you see on the screen right here is, okay, 5% Nation, 120 lessons, and you see it at the bottom. It says Book of Life. So as a 5%er, in order to learn the culture, you have to have a relationship with someone who lives the culture, which means you have to be immersed in the culture in order to understand how it functions, as well as the principles and the values. 120 lessons actually consists of 6 of the points that you see before you on your screen. Supreme Mathematics and Supreme Alphabet that you see here at the top represents one part of our language where we learn about various different principles, values, as well as characteristics in terms of ways in which we could identify ourselves in an elevated way. So, for example, the 17th letter in our alphabet is Q, which means queen. So that is one way in which we identify the women within our nation, as well as identifying an inherent quality within original women as a whole, even if they don't demonstrate or express that. Now, beneath that, you see student enrollment. You see the 1 to 14s, 1 to 36, 1 to 40s, actual facts, and solar facts. These 6 points comprises 120 lessons. So when you hear someone say 120 or the degrees, they're talking about 6 of these points of our flag, which is the majority of what we learn when it comes to our culture. So when you meet a person who is a 5%er and you're interested in learning from them, this is the cultural curriculum that you learn, which represents the fundamental principles and values that defines our worldview and how we assess our relationship to everything in the universe. Let me come back on screen for a second. So in meeting a person that is of the 5% and, person's interested in learning the culture, when I say learn the culture and be immersed in the culture, I'm talking about not simply browsing through these lessons. I'm talking about learning these lessons to the degree where you're able to recite them by heart, to literally know them. And it is from having the knowledge of these particular lessons that you can extract its wisdom and understand what it actually means. So for a person to say that they are of the 5%, they're also telling you that they have either mastered learning these lessons by heart, or they're still in the process of learning these lessons. So if I was to meet another 5%er and they identify themselves or whatever, and I asked them how long have they had knowledge of self or how long have they been studying, they may tell me that they got knowledge of self or they first started learning about this in 1996, right? So we're in 2019. It should not take a person over 10 years to learn these lessons. It shouldn't. Now, if that person tells me, oh, I started studying in 1996, but I haven't finished my lessons, then they're going to have a logical explanation why they have not committed themselves enough to learn these actual lessons. They may say, oh, the person that was teaching me, they went here, whatever, I lost contact with. But that still is not an excuse or a logical explanation why a person has not committed themselves to learning what it is that they think or they say is actually important to them. There's no reason for that. So let me show you this. We'll go off screen again. So when a person is learning this culture, there are various different approaches that an enlightener or a person that is teaching you takes when it comes to you being immersed in this culture and learning these particular parts of our curriculum. Some people that are teaching someone may start them off with learning the mathematics and getting them to study and learn the principles and how they operate in life. Somebody else may give a person the math and the alphabet, and they have to learn that first. Some people may not even start there and just starts a person off with learning their student enrollment. There's various different approaches, and that really depends upon the enlightener and how they want to educate that person. So this is just my book of life. And also, let me say this. A book of life is literally what that is. As a 5%er, that book of life is typically a binder which contains our lessons, but then also all of our research associated with those lessons. So in my book of life, and I have a couple of them, I may have things that I've researched about mesmerism or about aura photography, research about the planets, something that one of my brothers and sisters wrote about indigenous people in this particular place, or it has a variety of various different things that comprises your journey in knowledge of self. So that is why it says Book of Life at the bottom of this page, because this is something that comes from one of my binders in regards to my study. So say a person, in terms of gaining knowledge of self, they meet somebody and, they agree to take them on as a student. One of the first things that they begin to learn is, other than the alphabet and the mathematics, is this right here, the student enrollment. So let me see. So the student enrollment is 10 questions and answers, and a person is required to learn those 10 questions and answers and be able to recite them by heart before they're able to move forward with learning any other lessons. Now, some people find that very difficult, and that is oftentimes one of the reasons why some people who used to have knowledge of self, or used to be a 5%er or whatever, or they never really completed their studies because they found it difficult to go through the memorization process of learning these lessons. And that is also one of the reasons why, since they don't know these lessons, it's impossible for them to extract any wisdom out of what they don't know. And then also why you have people who never finish the process, who really don't have the accurate understanding about what the culture ultimately is, because they never committed themselves to getting the knowledge or learning these lessons, which means they have not been able to extract any wisdom. Therefore, they're not going to have any understanding. So the first 10 lessons is called a student enrollment, because this really gives a person a sense of that other person's commitment if they really want to go through the process of learning this culture. So once a person, they may get all 10 lessons at one time. I know some people who got it that way. I know other people who got one lesson at a time. And once they took that one lesson and studied it and researched it, they would come back to their enlightener, and their enlightener would test them on it to see if they know it word for word. It is only at that point that they allow them to move on to the next lesson. Some people, this process of learning 120, it took them some time. Other people, it's taken them some months. So let me move on to the next section. So after the person learns their 1 to 10s or the student enrollment, they move on to the next body of lessons, which is the 1 to 14s. So this is what the 1 to 14s looks like. There are 14 questions and answers that a person must learn in order to recite by heart. After that, they learn the 1 to 36. Now, this, again, is my particular order of me learning my lessons. Generally speaking, people get their 1 to 10s of their student enrollment first. Some people get their 1 to 36 next. Other people may get their 1 to 14 next, but the ultimate goal is to get 120. So the order that I got things in is I got my 1 to 14s. I learned those word for word. And then I moved on to the 1 to 36, learned those word for word. Then I moved on to the 1 to 40s, which is 40 questions and answers that you must learn and recite them by heart. And then after that, you get your actual facts, which gives you a sense of the geography of the planet Earth. And then the solar facts, which gives you a sense of the distance of the planets from the sun. And then, some people get the 12 Jews, some people don't get the 12 Jews, but this is actually what I got. So as a whole, it's a process that a person goes through in terms of learning 120. Now, in learning 120, it takes commitment, it takes discipline, and ultimately it's not much more discipline than the way people have already disciplined themselves to learn other things in life, that they're interested or invested in, but one of the things that delineates people who are immersed in this culture, who live this in a very formal way, from those who don't live this in a formal way, is we take them through the process of what lessons they actually know. So, for example, if I come in contact with someone and they tell me that they had knowledge of self and got it in 96 or something, and it's 2019 now, and we get into a conversation, and then I ask them, okay, so what lessons are you dealing with? And they tell me that they never completed 120. They're still on their student enrollment, which is 10 questions and answers. They've been there for over 10 years. So what that translates into is about one lesson per year, right? They're going to have a very valid reason why they have not followed through or committed themselves all of these years to learn what they consider to be important as their cultural worldview. Because our cultural worldview is founded upon this cultural curriculum. This is the foundation. Our mathematics, our alphabet. We also study the chronology of those who came before us or our elders. But it hinges upon this. As you see the 8 points of our flag, 6 of those points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, represents the cultural curriculum. That's the majority of what you learn when it comes to what our culture is about. So if a person got exposed to this many years ago, they never followed through, they're going to have a very good reason why they have not done that. A real good reason. And there's no way to actually fake it until you make it. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about our customs as the 5%, because if I was to come in contact with someone, for example, and they were asking me about knowledge of self, how long that I had knowledge of self, how long I've been studying, and I say, oh, I know 120, and they know 120, they are obligated, or they have the right to ask me about any one of these lessons in 120. They can ask me anything over here in this body of lessons. So let me show you this. They can be like, okay, so what's the 28th degree? Let me blow it up for you. What's the 28th degree in the 1 to 40s? And I'm obligated to answer them. I'm obligated to respond. So if I just told them that I know 120, I should be able to recite by heart what this lesson says. There's no way to fake it that I don't. There's no way to fake whether I know it or not. Because if they know it word for word, they're going to sit and listen and check me to see if I am able to recite that word for word. That's just knowledge. That's just knowing the lesson. That has nothing to do with extracting the wisdom. So say I do make it through reciting this lesson and it's a little shabby or whatever. You know what I mean? Then they can ask me, so how do you see that? Which means I have to extract wisdom from that lesson and share that with them. So I can actually share with them how I understand that lesson. That's something that you can't fake. You can't fake that. That is one of the main reasons, too, why this culture is not a religion. In religions, people are not really obligated to do certain things. If you're a Christian or something or a Muslim, all you got to do is say assalamu alaikum or just go to church, and nobody ain't asking you no questions. There is no obligation oftentimes in you demonstrating or showing and proving who you actually are in that religion. Our culture, our way of life is free, which means I can go anywhere that I want to go, but I have to be responsible in the places that I go because I'm grounded based upon principles and values that I learn within my culture. At the same time, we have certain customs that we are obligated to respect and respond to through one another. So if I'm on a plane and I get off in Portland, Oregon, and I'll come in contact with somebody and they wanted to build with me and I have time, I'm not in a rush or anything like that, and they're asking me about lessons or whatever, I'm obligated to respond. You know, there's been times where I've been at hip hop concerts and artists who are either affiliated with the 5% or who are formal members of the 5% have seen me at concerts and asked me about certain lessons or how did I see today's mathematics or any of those type of things that are customary of the 5%. Now, those are some of the things that right off the cuff delineates people who are just sympathizers or who, you know, are kind of, you know, certain principles and values that we teach, they respond to or that resonate with them. Those type of people are not obligated to respond in a formal way as we as 5%ers do. So one of the things that's important to understand is you may have some people who are online and they say that they're this, they say that they're that, they say that they're a 5%er. But if you ask them about this, let me go back. If you ask them anything about the math, the alphabet, the lessons, they would not be able to go through and share anything with you because they have not committed themselves to learning the cultural curriculum. So here's the thing. If this is not the basis of their worldview, what is? And if you sit back and analyze them, you'll realize that they're not really the formal 5%. They're borrowing concepts and ideas, sort of like a pack rat approach when it comes to other different cultures and putting it all together. You oftentimes see it in the hip hop industry. You see some people striving to speak our language, but then you look at them when they get in the war saying, you know, I thank God above. You know, or even online, there's sisters that I know who are really religious. You know, they're really affiliated with Muslims or other different things, but yet they strive to put on a facade or an image as if they are of the 5%. But if you ask them anything about the lessons or the mathematics, they wouldn't know. They wouldn't know. It's deceiving, you know? And unfortunately, you have a lot of people who would like to associate with us and identify as us, but they are not us. We are not Muslims. We are not religious. We are not any of these things that you see people doing. We have a very well thought out system of principles and values that are directly grounded within what I'm showing before you, our 120 lessons. And like I mentioned earlier, in order to learn this culture, you have to be immersed in it. This is not something that you order off of Amazon. You don't get these lessons off of Amazon. So a true 5%er is not selling lessons off of Amazon. A lot of fathers who started our nation didn't sell these lessons to the youth that were learning. No. And we don't do that at all either. So we don't publish them in a book. We're not selling them on Amazon. We're not sending them in the mail, postage mail to people. We're not putting them on Facebook Messenger or PDFs that you can download offline or you can Google. We don't do that. because lineage and legacy is important to us. So another thing, if a person came in contact with me, then I have to be able to authenticate where I got this from. Some person had to teach me this. Because if a person didn't teach you this, there is no one that was responsible for your growth and development. No one to walk you along the path of gaining knowledge of self, which means you're not really connected to a family, or you're not responsible for the legacy that was passed on to you. You're out here freelancing. So you have some people that may not know better. They're out here freelancing. They think that, oh, I'm going to go online, I'm going to download this, I'm going to buy this, and now I want to be a 5%er. No, you have to connect with somebody personally and develop a relationship with somebody that can show you how to walk this way of life. You have to be immersed in the culture. You have to learn it that way. So a part of that, like I mentioned, is authenticating your lineage or your legacy, meaning somebody has to know the person that taught me, as well as a person that taught them, as well as a person that taught them. And I can tell you my lineage or my legacy all the way back through the Father, Allah, who taught the firstborn, and then they begin to teach others. I know my lineage. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm right and exact either. Just because I can tell you where I got this from, you still have to assess a person's ways and actions, because sometimes people can stray away from civilization. They may have gotten knowledge and wisdom, but their understanding may be twisted because they may not have the type of relationship that is functional when it comes to their family. So you have to assess all of that, and that is what we do as a 5%. So we see people who may be online or who may be out here in the community saying one thing, but either they don't know this, what I'm showing you right here in terms of our lessons and our mathematics and our alphabet or chronology of our elders that came before us that laid the foundation. They may not know that, and they may not have somebody who actually taught them, or, it may be a person that may know some of these lessons. They may have had someone that taught them, but when you look at their way of life, it's not reflective of the culture. So that is one of the beautiful things I love about the nation of the 5%, is that there's no way to fake it until you make it. There's no way. There's no way for a person to say that they know all of this. And when you ask them questions, they have to be able to show and prove and demonstrate what it is that they know. There's been times where I've met people and I've seen them publicly around other people that don't know anything about this and striving to present themselves as if they're the 5% or something like that. And then when I come in contact with them and start questioning them, they drop their head. They start giving me these excuses. I got to get back on my studies. I got to do this, that, and the third, blah, 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 blah. Because there's no way to fake it until you make it. There's no way to do that. And this video is important because, like I said, you have a segment of people who want to be us, but they don't want to be us. They want to claim to be culturally free and to have a divine perspective when it comes to being the God of the earth or civilized people, but they don't want to commit themselves to learning any of this. They don't want to commit themselves to learning any of this. So the next time you hear people talking about 120, the degrees, 120 lessons, this, that, and the third, that is what they're actually talking about. They're referring to majority of our cultural curriculum that gives us the basis of our principles and values. Another thing that I wanted to talk about is when you look at these lessons, right? One of the things that you find in these lessons, which are instructions on life is there are over 60 places that are mentioned in our lessons. 60 different places. You know, for example, you got the wilderness of North America right here. Let me show you something else. Let me blow it up a little bit. You got Italy right here. You know, you got Mecca, you got Arabia. You have over 60 different places that are mentioned in 120. Also, you have over 100 different characters. And when I say characters, I'm talking about people. So let me show you this. You have black man, original black man. You have a half original man. You have Musa. You have the colored man. You have Columbus, Christopher Columbus. You have a prophet. You have Jesus. You have righteous brothers. You have over 100 different characters or people that are mentioned in 120. And then also you have 40 different objects, over 40 different objects that are mentioned in 120. So for example, right here, you have a sword. Up here, you have a shield. Let me show you this. In this lesson right here, you have a pen right here. So you have over 40 different objects in 120 as well. I mention that because when you're talking about lessons or learning tools in life, when we go through our mathematics and our degrees or our 120, you're striving to find the most effective and appropriate applications when it comes to people or characters, places, and things. So for example, in this lesson, show you this real quick. This lesson is in the 1 to 14s. Bring this up. Okay. What does it mean in the MGT and GCC? Muslim girl training and general civilization class. These are the names given to the girls and women that belong to Islam in North America, teaching them how to keep a home, how to raise their children, how to keep a husband, sew and cook. In general, how to act at home and abroad. These training units were set up by a prophet by the name of W.D. Farad. When you're looking at that lesson, whether you're male or female, you have to figure out what kind of wisdom can I extract from learning about Muslim girl training and general civilization class? You know, what's the importance of training units? Well, one of the things about trains is trains operate on a track. So training in any capacity is designed to keep you on track. It's designed for you to meet a certain goal and for you to reach a certain particular point in your growth and your development. These units were set up in regards to homemaking and just making sure that the family dynamics were the proper foundation to not only raise or rear children in, but also to make it as a safe haven for the family, because this family is the seminal unit of the community. So without that type of stability, then you're going to see unstable communities as a whole. This is the 14th degree in the 1 to 14. So 1 and 4 is knowledge culture. Knowledge culture is saying that that is a part of the foundation of the culture. You have to have the family intact. So a part of staying on track, or the importance of these type of training units, is to reinforce the identity or the role or the importance of the woman within the household, the man within the household, as well as the children. Because 1 and 4 equals 5. 5 represents power within our mathematics. And this is also the basis of how power dynamics are not only shaped in the household, but also within the community. And then the communities actually create larger things that we call neighborhoods. So when you look at any type of neighborhood or community, one of the things that you oftentimes may see are block clubs. And the role of block clubs are to position themselves in a way where they have some control over the power dynamics as well as the politics that affects the community as a whole. So all of those things you can just simply learn by researching a lesson like this, and at the same time, you're learning about characters. It implies objects. I mean, there's not an object that is directly mentioned in this lesson. And then you learn also about places. I just told you about the place in terms of the family unit, the community, as well as neighborhoods. But now if you go to a different lesson, like the 10th lesson, let me bring this up for you. This 10th lesson, it tells you about a pin to wear on the lapel of your coat. It also tells you about a certain type of character, a person that functions as a snake of the grafted type. It also tells you about a place, the holy city of Mecca. So in this perspective, that lesson is not only speaking about something in a chronological sense or something or an event or events that have happened in the past, but it's also giving you a sense of its allegorical application today, because it's talking about rendering a person 100% weak and wicked because they won't keep and obey, or they won't stay on track or uphold whatever it is that they've committed themselves to, and their word is not bond. So the lesson is really telling you about the appropriate way to address a person that you see is functioning like that. Because if allowed to live, they just think someone else. Meaning, if you allow someone like that to stay amongst you, then their behavior can ultimately infect others around them to take on the same type of behavior, mannerisms, and lack of character. So that, in an allegorical sense, is giving you a methodology of how to handle those type of scenarios or situations, but it's also identifying certain characters or people in particular places and the importance of certain objects. The object that I mentioned, the pin to wear on the lapel of your coat, is really a symbol of accomplishment once you've addressed that situation the way that it needed to be addressed. So sometimes when you're in various different arenas, whether it's a political arena or a military arena or various different places, you may see people wearing pins on the lapel of their coat, which is actually a symbol of some type of accomplishment. It identifies them in some type of way, which distinguishes them from other people who are in that environment. It's one way of being able to denote their degree of growth and development or their degree of accomplishment. So in that lesson, it's also referring to that in a person's process of being able to handle certain scenarios in their life, that this is symbolic to a level of accomplishment, and that accomplishment is going to be recognized and acknowledged by other different people, which also means that you serve as a resource to other people who may have not gotten to that point in their growth and development where they have been able to successfully deal with that type of scenario. They should be able to identify you and go to you. It's the exact same thing that you see with certain people in the military, where they have certain pins or certain markers to denote their rank, where you know certain people that you can go to for certain things. It's the exact same thing if you're in an environment where you have people who may have accomplished certain things on a corporate level. You know where they rank in terms of the chain of command or the corporate structure that you are engaging in. And within our lessons, you learn various different methods of how to use certain things or objects, the terrain in certain type of places, as well as the character of certain characters or of certain people that you come in contact with, not only from a chronological perspective when it comes to studying these lessons, but presently in life right now. So, for example, you learn about who Musa was or Christopher Columbus. You learn about Muhammad. You learn about Jesus and why his name was used to shield others certain perspectives in life. And you learn about a lot of those different things. And you also learn how to identify with these various different people, how to recognize certain things in certain places or terrains that you traverse, as well as the application of certain objects. It's no different than a role-playing video game, but unfortunately, this shit is real. And I say unfortunately because there ain't no unlimited men in this game. It's not no 3 outs and then you're gone. Game over when you have one person in this game. And thankfully, we've been given this as a jewel to be able to, guide our life. So, I will, this was inspiring, it was empowering, it was educational. It just gave those of you a general overview and tutorial on, what 120 is. And, also how to distinguish between people who are not of the 5% as opposed to people who are formally committed to this culture. You're not of the 5% if you don't know this and you're not committed to knowing this. There's no way to say that. And it's okay to be a person that may see some of our principles and values and it resonates with you when you are just an outsider and that's how you live. You haven't committed yourself to learning any of this. You're not held or obligated to respond to me or other 5%ers the same way that I would hold a person to a standard of commitment that claims to be a person that lives this culture. A person that's on the outside, that's just a simple sympathizer. And I say simple because sometimes you have people who that is what they are, but then they strive to talk like they are more than what they are, which deceives people, So again, I appreciate you tuning in, and I will that this was helpful. Last thing that I wanted to mention is if you're striving to learn, people reach out to me all the time. Reach out to me, email me if you can at atlantisbuild@gmail.com. If you're in my area, connect with me. If you're not in my area, still reach out and I will strive to connect you with a person, an actual person that you can learn this culture through. And again, we don't sell these lessons on Amazon or you're not able to download them from one of us off of Google or any of those type of things, because that's not responsible as a person who is invested in the growth and development of another person's life. That would not be responsible of me to be able to do something like that and have people out here that have really no clue about what they're doing. So, peace.